The thunder of distant hoofbeats was all Vivian Summers could hear over her own labored breathing as she raced through the scrubland. Her skirts hiked up to her knees, and her bonnet long since abandoned to the howling Wyoming wind. Glancing back over her shoulder at the dust cloud gaining on her, she knew her desperate escape from Rawlins was about to come to an inglorious end. It was 1875, and Vivian had just turned 21 when her life went to pieces. Within the span of 3 months, her father had died of consumption. Their small dry goods store had been seized by creditors, and her mother had followed her father to the grave, leaving Vivian entirely alone in the world with nothing but debts and a bounty on her head for crimes she hadn't committed. "Hold up there, Miss Summers," called a deep voice as the rider finally caught up to her. The man pulled his chestnut mare to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion, dust billowing around his worn leather boots. "You've led me on quite a chase." Vivian stumbled to a halt, her chest heaving as she turned to face him. He wasn't what she expected. Tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin, the man before her had the weathered look of someone who lived his life outdoors. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see clear blue eyes studying her with equal parts determination, and was that sympathy? "I didn't do it," she said, her voice cracking from thirst and desperation. "Whatever they told you, I'm innocent." The man approached slowly, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. "Name's Vaughn Thornton, Miss Summers. I'm the sheriff from Walla Walla over in Washington Territory." He tapped the silver star pinned to his vest. "And I'm not here about any crimes, I'm here about your uncle's will." "My uncle?" Vivian frowned, bewildered. "I don't have an uncle." Sheriff Thornton reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document. "According to this, you did, Jebediah Summers. He passed 3 weeks ago and left you his homestead in Walla Walla. I've been tracking you down ever since." Vivian's legs nearly gave out beneath her. I don't understand. Why would someone I've never met leave me property?" "That's only half the story, madam." The sheriff's expression turned uncomfortable. "There's a condition to the inheritance. According to territorial law and your uncle's will, you need to be married to claim the property." He was quite specific about that part. Vivian's brief moment of hope plummeted. "Married? I don't even know anyone in Washington Territory." "Well, that's where things get complicated." Sheriff Thornton removed his hat, revealing a full head of dark hair with premature streaks of silver at the temples. "Your uncle named a specific person in his will, said if you wanted the homestead, you'd have to marry me." The vast Wyoming plains seemed to spin around her. But that's preposterous. I've never even met you before this moment. Believe me, Miss Summers, I was just as surprised as you are." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I did some work for your uncle years back, saved his life during an Apache raid, helped him establish his claim. He always said he was grateful, but I never expected this." Vivian stared at the man, trying to make sense of what he was proposing. "And you just rode all the way from Washington Territory to find me and, what, propose marriage to a complete stranger?" "I rode out here to inform you of your inheritance and the conditions attached. What you choose to do with that information is entirely up to you." His eyes softened. "But from what I've heard in town, you could use a fresh start, and Walla Walla is about as fresh a start as they come." Vivian glanced back toward Rawlins, where a warrant for theft awaited her false accusations from the banker who had foreclosed on her family's store and then claimed inventory had gone missing. With no money, no family, and nowhere to go, her options were painfully limited. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate scheme, that you're even who you say you are?" she challenged. Sheriff Thornton handed her the document. "Read it yourself. It's all legal, signed by a judge and everything. I've got no designs on you, Miss Summers. This is about honoring a good man's last wishes, strange as they may be." Vivian examined the paper with trembling hands, recognizing the official seals and signatures. It was real. Her mind raced with possibilities and the lack thereof. "If I agree to this." "Arrangement," she said carefully. "What exactly would be expected of me?" "On paper, just your signature on a marriage certificate. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we'd have to figure it out as we go. The property's good land, 40 acres with a solid house and barn." Your uncle worked it alone for 15 years. It could support two people living separate lives under one roof if that's what you wanted. Vivian studied the man before her. There was something steady about him, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. His eyes held no malice, no deceit that she could detect. "What's in it for you, Sheriff Thornton?" she finally asked. For the first time he smiled, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "I've been sleeping in a room above the jailhouse for 8 years. The idea of having an actual home is appealing, even if it comes with unusual circumstances. And," he hesitated, "I gave your uncle my word I'd at least try to honor his wishes." A gust of wind whipped across the plains, sending tumbleweeds rolling past them. In the distance, Vivian could see riders approaching from Rawlins. Her time had run out. "Those men coming for you?" Sheriff Thornton asked quietly. Vivian nodded, heart pounding. "The banker claims I stole merchandise before they seized the store." "I didn't, but no one believes the word of a destitute woman over a prominent businessman." Sheriff Thornton glanced at the approaching riders, then back to Vivian. "I can help you disappear, Miss Summers. A fresh start in Walla Walla, but I need your answer now." Vivian looked down at the document in her hands, then at the approaching dust cloud, and finally at the steady blue eyes of the stranger offering her an escape. "Yes," she whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "I accept." Sheriff Thornton nodded once, then swiftly helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were galloping away across the windswept plains, leaving Rawlins and her old life behind. The journey to Walla Walla was long and arduous. They traveled mostly by train, with occasional stretches on horseback through territories where the railroad hadn't yet reached. Sheriff Thornton, who insisted she call him Vaughn, proved to be a quiet but attentive traveling companion. He respected her space, never pressing her for more than she was willing to give, yet remained vigilant about her comfort and safety. It gave Vivian time to contemplate the extraordinary turn her life had taken. One moment she'd been fleeing arrest in Wyoming, the next she was heading to Washington Territory to marry a man she'd known for less than a day. "Tell me about my uncle," she said one evening as they sat in a small hotel dining room in Idaho Territory. "I didn't even know my father had a brother." Vaughn set down his coffee cup. Jebediah was a complicated man, stubborn as a mule and twice as contrary when he wanted to be, but he was honest to a fault and fiercely loyal to those he cared about. "Why did he never contact us? My father never mentioned him." "From what Jebediah told me, there was a falling out many years ago, something about your grandmother's wedding ring and who should have inherited it." Vaughn shook his head. "Seems like a small thing to destroy a brotherhood over, but that's how it was with Jebediah. Once he felt wronged, he held that grudge like it was gold. Yet he left me his property. He followed your family's fortunes from afar. When he learned of your father's passing, something changed in him. Started putting his affairs in order, talking about making amends." Vaughn's eyes held a distant look. "Never got the chance. Heart gave out while he was mending fences on the north side of his property." Vivian absorbed this, trying to reconcile the image of this unknown uncle who had lived his life apart from them, yet thought of her at the end. "And the marriage condition, why would he insist on that?" Vaughn cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Jebediah believed in traditional values, said a young woman shouldn't be living alone on frontier land, that it wasn't safe." He hesitated. "And I think in his own way he was trying to give you protection through a legal union. Property rights for women being what they are." Vivian nodded slowly. It made a certain kind of sense, even if it felt antiquated and presumptuous. "And he chose you because you saved his life." "Partly that. Partly because I was unmarried and, as he put it, too damn devoted to that sheriff's badge to find a wife on my own." Vaughn's lips quirked in a small smile. "He wasn't entirely wrong about that part. Have you never wanted to marry, Sheriff?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its propriety. His expression sobered. "I was engaged once, about 10 years back. She died of mountain fever before we could wed." He said it simply, without drama, but Vivian could see the old pain in his eyes. "After that, I threw myself into my work, easier that way." "I'm sorry," Vivian said quietly, Life goes on, he replied with a gentle shrug. What about you? No suitors back in Rawlins? Vivian gave a small, bitter laugh. There was one, the banker's son, as it happens. Once my father died and the store was foreclosed, his interest in me mysteriously disappeared. Then his father accused me of theft and, well, she gestured vaguely. Here we are, convenient timing for those accusations, Vaughn observed. I thought so too, Vivian said dryly. As they continued their journey, Vivian found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Vaughn's presence. There was something reassuring about his steady nature and quiet competence. He never pressed her for more than casual conversation, but answered all her questions honestly and directly. The landscape changed dramatically as they traveled west. The plains gave way to mountains, which eventually softened into rolling hills covered with golden wheat fields and verdant valleys. When they finally crossed into Washington territory, Vivian felt something unexpected: anticipation. We'll reach Walla Walla by tomorrow evening, Vaughn told her as they made camp for their final night on the trail. Judge Parker agreed to meet us the following morning to handle the paperwork, if you're still willing. Vivian sat by the small campfire, watching the flames dance. I've come all this way, she said softly. I'm not turning back now. Vaughn nodded, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. You should know that no one in town is aware of the arrangement. They just know Jebediah left his property to his niece. The marriage condition is between us and the judge. He paused. What I mean to say is, you won't be subject to gossip. You can simply tell people we courted by correspondence if anyone asks. The consideration touched her. Thank you for that. It's your life and your reputation, he said simply. I won't be the cause of damage to either. Later that night, as she lay in her bedroll looking up at the vast canopy of stars, Vivian wondered what kind of man she had agreed to bind her life to. He was nothing like the few suitors she'd entertained back in Rawlins, not as polished or educated perhaps, but there was a depth to him that those boys had lacked, a sense of honor that seemed to guide his every action. She had agreed to this marriage for practical reasons: shelter, security, escape. But as she drifted off to sleep, Vivian found herself curious about what kind of partnership they might forge together, this sheriff and the fugitive he had rescued. Walla Walla revealed itself the next day as they crested a final hill. The town sprawled across a valley surrounded by gentle mountains and lush farmland. It was larger than Vivian had expected, with proper streets lined with brick buildings, churches with tall steeples, and a bustle of activity that spoke of prosperity. It's beautiful, she murmured. The name means place of many waters in the local native language, Vaughn explained. The valley's rich, good for farming, ranching. The town's growing fast since they found gold up north. As they rode down the main street, Vivian was acutely aware of curious glances directed their way. Vaughn nodded politely to several people, but didn't stop to make introductions. Your uncle's place now is about 3 miles outside town, he said as they passed through the far side of the settlement. We'll head there directly so you can get settled. The property came into view as they rounded a bend in the road. A modest 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all nestled in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. A small stream cut through one corner of the property, and beyond the house, Vivian could see fenced pastures where a few horses grazed contentedly. This is all mine, she whispered, overwhelmed by the sight. Yours as of tomorrow morning, Vaughn corrected gently, helping her down from the horse. Once the judge makes it official. They spent the remainder of the day exploring the property. The house was simple but solidly built, with 4 rooms downstairs and 3 above. The furniture was utilitarian but well crafted, and everything was surprisingly clean. I asked Mrs. Hollister from town to come out and prepare the place, Vaughn explained as Vivian ran her fingers along a dust-free mantel. Didn't seem right for you to arrive to a musty house. That night, Vaughn insisted on sleeping in the barn while Vivian took the master bedroom. It's your house, he said firmly when she protested. I'm just a guest until tomorrow. Lying in the unfamiliar bed that night, surrounded by the possessions of an uncle she'd never known, Vivian felt a strange mixture of trepidation and hope. Tomorrow she would marry Sheriff Vaughn Thornton, becoming his wife in the eyes of the law while remaining a stranger in all the ways that truly mattered. It was an unusual arrangement, to be sure, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could work. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Vivian dressed carefully in her best dress, a blue calico that had seen better days, but was at least clean and mended. She pinned her honey blonde hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck and pinched her pale cheeks to give them some color. "Are you ready?" Vaughn asked when she descended the stairs. He was dressed in a clean black suit that looked slightly too tight across his broad shoulders, and he'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. "As ready as I'll ever be," Vivian replied with a nervous smile. The judge was waiting for them at his office in town, a kindly older gentleman with spectacles and tufts of white hair. He explained the paperwork efficiently, then performed a brief ceremony. Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she signed the marriage certificate, making her new name official, Vivian Thornton. "Congratulations," the judge said, beaming at them both. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity." Vaughn thanked him politely, then guided Vivian outside with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Well, Mrs. Thornton," he said quietly, "it's done." Vivian nodded, feeling strangely numb. It had all happened so quickly, this fundamental change in her status and identity. "I thought perhaps we might have lunch at the hotel," Vaughn suggested. "Give the town a chance to meet you properly, unless you'd prefer to return to the homestead." Vivian squared her shoulders. "Lunch sounds lovely. I should get to know the place if I'm to call it home." The hotel dining room was busy when they arrived, and a noticeable hush fell over the room as Vaughn escorted her to a table. He nodded politely to the assembled diners, many of whom were openly staring at Vivian. Sheriff Thornton, a plump woman in an elaborate hat, approached their table, curiosity radiating from her. "Aren't you going to introduce us to your companion, Mrs. Davenport?" Vaughn said politely. "May I present my wife, Vivian Thornton? Vivian, this is Mrs. Davenport, whose husband owns the mercantile." The woman's eyes widened comically. "Your wife? When on earth did this happen?" "This morning," Vaughn replied calmly. "Mrs. Thornton is Jebediah Summers' niece. We've been corresponding since her uncle's passing and decided it was time to make our arrangement official." Vivian marveled at how smoothly the partial truth flowed from his lips, especially from a man who had struck her as painfully honest in all their previous interactions. News of their marriage spread through the dining room like wildfire, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers, each more curious than the last. Vivian did her best to appear the happy bride, smiling until her cheeks hurt and answering questions as vaguely as possible. "How long have you been courting?" asked the banker's wife. "Did you meet when the sheriff visited back east?" inquired the milliner. "Will you be taking over your uncle's farm or moving into town?" questioned the blacksmith. By the time they finished lunch, Vivian was exhausted from the social performance. Vaughn must have noticed, for he smoothly extracted them from the gathering with claims of needing to help his new bride settle in. "I'm sorry about that," he said as they rode back to the homestead. "Small towns run on gossip. Best to give them something straightforward to talk about rather than letting them speculate." "You handled it well," Vivian observed. "I wasn't expecting you to be so diplomatic." Vaughn's mouth quirked upward. 8 years as sheriff teaches you how to manage people's expectations. The truth is usually best, but sometimes it needs careful framing. Back at the farmhouse, an awkward tension settled between them as evening approached. The reality of their situation, now legally bound, but still essentially strangers, seemed to fill the space between them. "I'll sleep in the small bedroom upstairs," Vaughn finally said as they finished washing the dinner dishes. "You keep the master bedroom." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Vivian's chest. "Are you sure this was meant to be your home too?" "I'm sure," he said firmly. "Nothing has to change between us just because we signed some papers. We'll take things one day at a time." That night, lying alone in her bed, Vivian listened to the unfamiliar creaks of the house and the soft sounds of Vaughn moving about in the room down the hall. She had a husband now, a concept so strange she could hardly grasp it. A husband who was currently keeping his distance, allowing her space and time to adjust to this new reality. It was considerate of him, respectful. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, Vivian found herself wondering what it might be like to truly be Vaughn Thornton's wife in more than just name. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Vaughn returned to his duties as sheriff, riding into town each morning and returning in the evening. Vivian explored the property, familiarized herself with the household accounts, and began tentatively planning what to do with the small garden plot behind the house. At night, they would share dinner and quiet conversation, learning each other's histories in small, careful doses. Vaughn told her about growing up in Missouri, his time fighting for the Union during the war, and his eventual drift westward seeking a fresh start. Vivian shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania before her family moved to Wyoming, her mother's love of literature, and her father's dreams of building a mercantile empire that never quite materialized. They were building something between them, not quite friendship, not quite courtship, but a fragile foundation of mutual respect and growing understanding. A week after the wedding, Vaughn returned home with a grim expression that immediately put Vivian on alert. "What's happened?" she asked, setting aside the inventory list she'd been working on. "Telegram came in today," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "From the sheriff in Rawlins. Seems they're still looking for you and they've expanded the search. They're offering a reward now." Vivian's blood ran cold. "How much?" $500. She sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "That's more than the value of everything allegedly stolen combined. This isn't about justice anymore." "No," Vaughn agreed, sitting across from her. "This is personal. The banker's making sure you can't escape his reach." "What do we do?" Vivian whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. "For now, nothing changes. You're Vivian Thornton now, not Vivian Summers. You're my wife and Jebediah's niece with all the legal protections that entails." His blue eyes held steady on hers. "But we should be prepared. Bounty hunters might come sniffing around eventually." That night, sleep eluded Vivian. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the pines outside her window, became the footsteps of men coming to drag her back to Wyoming in chains. When a particularly loud crack from the roof sent her bolt upright in bed, Vivian knew she couldn't bear another moment alone with her fears. Before she could reconsider, she slipped from her room and padded down the hallway to Vaughn's door. She hesitated, then knocked softly. "Vaughn," she whispered. The door opened almost immediately, revealing him in trousers and an undershirt, clearly also awake. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his features. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words difficult to voice. Every sound, understanding dawned in his eyes. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "Take the bed, I'll sit in the chair." "No, Vivian struggled to articulate what she needed. "Could you just talk to me for a while, until I'm not so frightened?" They ended up sitting side by side on his narrow bed, backs against the wall, speaking in hushed tones about inconsequential things. The weather, the garden plans, the peculiarities of Walla Walla's townspeople. Gradually, the tightness in Vivian's chest eased, and she found herself growing drowsy against Vaughn's shoulder. "You should get some rest," he murmured, his voice a comforting rumble against her cheek. "Can I stay?" The question slipped out before she could censor it. Feeling his slight tension, she hurried to add, "Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight." Vaughn was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Take the bed, I'll make a pallet on the floor." "No," Vivian said firmly, surprising herself with her boldness. "The bed is plenty big for both of us if we're careful, and it's your bed anyway." They arranged themselves awkwardly, a careful distance between their bodies, both lying rigid as boards at first. But as exhaustion overtook them, the space between them naturally diminished until Vivian's back was pressed against Vaughn's chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. It was the first night since arriving in Walla Walla that Vivian slept without dreams. In the pale light of dawn, Vivian woke to find herself still enfolded in Vaughn's embrace, his steady breathing warming the nape of her neck. For a moment she remained perfectly still, cataloging the unfamiliar but not unwelcome sensations. The solid strength of his arm around her, the comforting weight of his body close to hers, the clean, masculine scent of him. This was not part of their arrangement. They had agreed to a marriage of convenience, a legal fiction to secure her inheritance and give her protection. And yet, lying there in the quiet morning light, Vivian couldn't bring herself to regret the boundary they had crossed. When Vaughn stirred behind her, she felt him tense as awareness returned to him. "I'm sorry," he murmured, already beginning to withdraw his arm. Vivian surprised herself by catching his hand, keeping it in place. "Don't be," she whispered. "I'm not." Slowly, she turned within the circle of his arms until they were face to face, their breath mingling in the small space between them. His blue eyes searched hers, questioning, uncertain. "Vivian," he said, her name both a question and a caution. "I know this isn't what we agreed to," she said softly, "but I'm beginning to think perhaps we were too hasty in setting those boundaries." Vaughn's expression remained serious, though his eyes had darkened. "I don't want you to feel obligated. Just because we signed those papers, this has nothing to do with obligation," Vivian interrupted. "And everything to do with how I feel when I'm with you." Gathering her courage, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Safe, seen, valued. Something shifted in Vaughn's expression, a softening around his eyes, a subtle parting of his lips. "I've been trying so hard to give you space," he admitted, "to not take advantage of the situation. What if I don't want space anymore?" Vivian asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Instead of answering with words, Vaughn lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a gentle question, but when Vivian responded eagerly, it deepened into something more urgent, more honest than any conversation they had shared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing rapidly, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he confessed. "When I rode out to Wyoming, I was just fulfilling a promise to a dying man. I never thought that you might actually come to care for his niece," Vivian finished for him, a smile playing at her lips. "That I might come to care so much so quickly," he corrected, his expression serious again. "This isn't just about convenience for me anymore, Vivian, if it ever truly was." The admission sent warmth flooding through her. "Nor for me," she whispered, and sealed the truth of it with another kiss. They rose late that morning, something shy and new vibrating between them as they moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast together. Vaughn's hand would brush against hers as they reached for the same utensil. Vivian would feel his eyes on her when she thought he wasn't looking. It was a delicate dance of discovery, this new awareness of each other not as reluctant partners in a legal arrangement, but as a man and woman drawn together by genuine affection. "I should head into town," Vaughn said eventually, though he made no move to leave the table where they sat lingering over coffee. "I'm already late." "The town can survive without its sheriff for one morning, can't it?" Vivian suggested, feeling uncharacteristically bold. A slow smile spread across Vaughn's face. "I suppose it can at that." They spent the day exploring the property together, Vaughn showing Vivian the boundaries of the land, the best fishing spots along the stream, the wild strawberry patch hidden in a sunny clearing. It felt like a courtship, the kind they should have had before their hasty wedding, and Vivian found herself laughing more than she had in months. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the house hand in hand. The ease between them now was palpable, as if some invisible barrier had dissolved with that first kiss at dawn. "I should check on the horses before it gets dark," Vaughn said as they reached the yard. "I'll start supper," Vivian replied, reluctantly releasing his hand. She was chopping vegetables when she heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders by the sound of it. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered Vaughn's warning about bounty hunters. Wiping her hands on her apron, Vivian moved cautiously to the window. 3 men were dismounting in the yard, their trail-worn appearance and the way they carried themselves alert, hands never far from their weapons, immediately set off warning bells in Vivian's mind. These weren't neighbors coming to call. She saw Vaughn emerge from the barn, his posture changing as he assessed the newcomers. Even from a distance, She could see the subtle shift as he moved his hand closer to the revolver at his hip. Vivian grabbed Vaughn's shotgun from where it hung above the mantel and moved to the front door, heart racing. Through the partially open door, she could hear the conversation unfolding in the yard. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Vaughn was saying, his tone professionally cordial but with an unmistakable edge. "What brings you to Walla Walla? Looking for a fugitive," said the tallest of the three, a lean man with a pockmarked face. "Woman by the name of Vivian Summers. Wanted for theft back in Wyoming territory. Trail led us this direction." "Can't say I've heard of her," Vaughn replied evenly, "but Walla Walla's a growing town, lot of new faces these days." The second man, broader with a distinctive red beard, stepped forward. "That's mighty interesting, Sheriff, seeing as we heard in town that you recently married a woman who just arrived from the East, quite suddenly from what folks say." "My wife is Vivian Thornton," Vaughn said, emphasizing the surname. "She's Jebediah Summers' niece from Pennsylvania. Came west to claim her inheritance after her uncle passed." "Summers, you say?" The third man spoke up, his voice carrying a dangerous note. "Interesting coincidence, ain't it?" "Not particularly," Vaughn replied coolly. "It's a common enough name." The men exchanged glances, and Vivian could see they weren't convinced. The pockmarked man's hand drifted toward his gun. "We'd like to see this wife of yours, Sheriff, just to be certain." Vivian's blood ran cold as she realized their intent. These men hadn't come to arrest her, they'd come for the bounty, and they wouldn't care whether they took her back alive or dead. Before Vaughn could respond, she stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand but pointed safely toward the ground. "I'm Vivian Thornton," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "Who's asking after me?" All eyes turned to her. Vaughn's expression flashed with concern before smoothing back into professional calm. "Mrs. Thornton," the pockmarked man said, studying her intently. "These gentlemen and I are looking for a woman who bears a striking resemblance to you, a thief from Wyoming." "I've never been to Wyoming in my life," Vivian replied, the lie coming easily. "I was born and raised in Philadelphia, moved west only after my uncle passed." "That's so?" Red Beard asked skeptically. "Then you won't mind if we have a look at your papers, marriage certificate, deed to the property, that sort of thing?" "I mind very much," Vivian said firmly. "Those are private documents, and you have no authority to demand them." The third man stepped forward menacingly. "We ain't asking nicely, lady." In one fluid motion, Vaughn drew his revolver and leveled it at the man. "That's far enough," he said, all pretense of cordiality gone from his voice. "You men are welcome to file an official inquiry with the territorial court if you have concerns about my wife's identity. Until then, you're trespassing on private property." The tension in the yard was palpable as the three men considered their options. They were armed, but Vaughn had the advantage of position and the clear moral high ground as the local sheriff defending his home. "This ain't over," the pockmarked man finally said, backing toward his horse. "We'll be watching." "You do that," Vaughn replied evenly, his gun remaining trained on them as they mounted up. "And while you're at it, you can tell whoever sent you that harassment of the local sheriff and his wife won't be tolerated in Walla Walla." Only after the riders had disappeared down the road did Vaughn holster his weapon and turn to Vivian. The concern he'd been masking now flooded his features. "Are you all right?" Vivian nodded, though her hands trembled around the shotgun. "They're bounty hunters, aren't they?" "Yes," Vaughn confirmed grimly. "And they won't give up easily, not with $500 at stake." That evening, as they secured the house for the night, checking locks and drawing curtains, the precariousness of Vivian's situation hung heavy between them. "I should leave," she said suddenly as Vaughn banked the fire for the night. "My presence here puts you in danger. You could lose your position as sheriff or worse." "No," Vaughn's response was immediate and firm. He crossed to where she stood and took her hands in his. "You're my wife, Vivian. Not just on paper anymore." His blue eyes held hers, fierce with conviction. "I will not let them take you." "But no," he repeated, pulling her gently into his arms. "We'll face this together. I have friends in the territorial government, connections we can use to clear your name properly." Vivian rested her head against his chest, drawing strength from the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "When did this become real for you?" she asked quietly. "This marriage of ours?" Vaughn was silent for a moment, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "I think it started the moment I saw you running across that Wyoming plain," he finally admitted. "You were so brave, so determined, and then when you agreed to come all this way with a stranger on nothing but a promise and a piece of paper." He shook his head in wonder. "I tried to keep my distance, to honor our arrangement, but the truth is, I've been falling for you since the beginning." Vivian tilted her face up to his, her heart full. "And I've been falling for you too," she whispered. "My husband by law, but now by choice as well." Their kiss sealed the new understanding between them. This was no longer a marriage of convenience, but a true union of hearts. That night, for the first time, they shared the master bedroom as husband and wife in every sense, their bodies expressing what words had only begun to articulate. The bounty hunters remained in Walla Walla for several days, making their presence known around town, asking questions about the sheriff's new bride. But Vaughn had lived in the community for 8 years and had earned its trust and loyalty. The townspeople closed ranks, protecting one of their own. "Mrs. Davenport actually told them she'd known about our courtship for months," Vaughn reported with amusement one evening. "Said we'd been exchanging letters all winter and that she'd helped me pick out a brooch to send you for Christmas." Vivian laughed, shaking her head in wonder. "And they believed her. She's the biggest gossip in 3 counties. If she says it's so, who's going to argue?" Vaughn grinned, pulling Vivian into his lap as they sat on the porch swing. "The blacksmith backed her up, said he remembered me talking about my lady friend back east for at least a year." "I had no idea you inspired such loyalty," Vivian marveled, nestling against him. "It's not just me they're protecting," Vaughn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've made quite an impression yourself these past weeks. Mrs. Hollister thinks you're a breath of fresh air, and Judge Parker told me just yesterday what a fine addition you are to the community." Vivian felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer evening. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she belonged somewhere to someone. 2 weeks after the bounty hunters' arrival, they departed as suddenly as they had come, apparently convinced that Vivian Thornton was not the woman they sought, or at least that pursuing her wasn't worth the trouble of confronting a popular sheriff and his protective community. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Vaughn continued his duties as sheriff while Vivian took on the running of the farm with growing confidence. She planted a vegetable garden, learned to make cheese from the milk of their 2 cows, and even began helping with the horses, discovering an unexpected affinity for the animals. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, or in front of the fire during cooler nights, reading aloud to each other from Jebediah's small collection of books. Their physical relationship deepened alongside their emotional one, a passion igniting between them that neither had anticipated when they'd entered their unusual arrangement. Autumn came to the valley in a riot of color, the surrounding forests blazing with red and gold. The harvest was bountiful, and Vivian found herself at the center of the community's harvest festival, no longer an outsider but a respected farmer's wife and the sheriff's beloved partner. It was at this festival, as they danced beneath lanterns strung between apple trees in the town square, that Vaughn whispered in her ear, "I love you, Vivian Thornton." Vivian's heart soared at the words she'd been feeling but hadn't yet dared to voice. "And I love you, Vaughn Thornton," she replied, her eyes shining with certainty. "With all my heart." That winter brought heavy snows that blanketed the valley in white. The farmhouse became a cozy haven, warmed by the constant fire in the hearth and the deepening love between its inhabitants. On the coldest nights, they would curl together beneath thick quilts, sharing dreams and plans for the future they were building. It was during one such night, as wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, that Vivian shared her suspicion. "Vaughn," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it gently on her belly, "I think we're going to have a baby." His eyes widened, then filled with such tenderness that Vivian felt tears spring to her own. A baby, he repeated in wonder. Our baby. Our baby, she confirmed, laughing as he gathered her into his arms, his joy as boundless as her own. Spring arrived with the promise of new life everywhere in the fields they planted together, in the foals born to their mares, and most precious of all, in the gentle swell of Vivian's abdomen. The community embraced the news of the coming child with enthusiasm, showering the couple with handmade gifts and well wishes. It was in late spring, as Vivian sat mending on the porch while Vaughn repaired a fence nearby, that an official-looking rider approached the property. Vaughn straightened, hand instinctively moving to his hip where his revolver would normally be, though he'd left it inside while working. "Sheriff Thornton," the man called as he drew closer. "That's me," Vaughn replied, moving protectively toward the porch where Vivian sat. The man dismounted, retrieving a leather document case from his saddlebag. "Marshal James Wilson, Territorial Court." He showed a badge, then extended a sealed envelope. "I have documents regarding a Vivian Summers, formerly of Rawlins, Wyoming Territory." Vivian's heart nearly stopped as Vaughn accepted the envelope, his expression carefully neutral. "What's this about, Marshal?" "The charges against Miss Summers have been dropped," Wilson explained. "It seems the banker who accused her has been arrested himself for embezzlement and fraud. He confessed to fabricating the theft charges to cover his own crimes." Relief washed over Vivian so powerfully she had to grip the porch railing for support. "Is this official?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, madam," the marshal replied, nodding respectfully. "That document contains formal notification that all charges and warrants have been rescinded. Miss Summers, or Mrs. Thornton, as I understand it now, is completely cleared." After the marshal departed, Vivian and Vaughn sat together on the porch steps, the official document spread between them. "It's over," Vivian whispered, still hardly able to believe it. "Truly over." "You're free," Vaughn agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Vivian leaned against him, considering his words. "I've been free since the day you found me," she said softly. "You gave me that gift along with a home, a community." She placed his hand over her growing belly, and a family. Vaughn's eyes softened as he looked down at her. "When I rode out to Wyoming on Jebediah's strange errand, I never imagined." He shook his head, unable to find words adequate for the transformation in his life. "That you'd end up with a wife you actually wanted," Vivian teased gently. "That I'd find the other half of my heart," he corrected, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You may have become my wife because of your uncle's will and territorial law, but I became your husband because I fell in love with the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known." Their child was born as summer reached its zenith, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's golden hair. They named him Jebediah in honor of the uncle whose unconventional bequest had brought them together. On the evening of their son's birth, as twilight painted the valley in shades of purple and gold, Vaughn carried the swaddled infant onto the porch where Vivian rested in a rocking chair. He placed their son gently in her arms, then knelt beside them. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been saving it for the right moment." In his palm lay a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "I know we did things backward, marriage first, courtship after, but I wanted to give you this properly." His eyes held hers, filled with all the love that had grown between them over the past year. "Vivian Thornton, will you continue to be my wife, not because of any law or obligation, but because we choose each other every day for all our days to come?" Tears of joy spilled down Vivian's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." As Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger and sealed their renewed vows with a kiss, their infant son nestled between them, Vivian marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate fugitive running across the Wyoming plains to a beloved wife, mother, and respected member of the Walla Walla community. She had become a cowboy's wife because of law, but he had made it because of love. And together, they had built something far more precious than either of them could have imagined. A true partnership, a family, a home where both their hearts could finally rest. As the years passed, the Thornton family grew and flourished. Vaughn eventually retired from his position as sheriff to focus on expanding their farm, which had become one of the most productive in the valley. Vivian gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret after Vaughn's mother, and another son they called William. The story of their unusual beginning became a favorite family tale, told with laughter around the dinner table as their children grew. Young Jebediah, in particular, loved hearing about his namesake's unusual bequest and how his parents had found love in the most unexpected circumstances. In 1890, 15 years after Vivian had fled across the Wyoming plains, the Thorntons hosted a grand celebration for their anniversary. The entire community gathered at their farm, which had expanded to include orchards, wheat fields, and one of the finest horse breeding operations in Washington state. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated the yard where friends and neighbors danced and celebrated, Vaughn found Vivian standing alone by the old porch, watching their children play with the other young people. "Any regrets, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, sliding his arms around her waist from behind. Vivian leaned back against his chest, covering his hands with her own. The diamond ring he'd given her on the day of their son's birth caught the light, sparkling alongside the simple gold band that had made her his wife by law before their hearts had fully understood what they were committing to. "Not a single one," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. Though lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes and silver now dominated the dark hair at his temples, he was still the most handsome man she had ever known. "Every step, every decision led me here to you, to our family. How could I regret any of it?" Vaughn's smile, that same warm, steady smile that had first begun to win her heart during their long journey west, spread across his face. "I was thinking," he said, taking her hand and leading her away from the celebration toward the quiet of their orchard, "that perhaps next year we might take a trip. The children are old enough now, and Jebediah is quite capable of managing things for a few weeks." "A trip?" Vivian raised her eyebrows in surprise. In 15 years of marriage, they had rarely ventured far from Walla Walla. "Where did you have in mind?" "Back east," Vaughn replied. "To Pennsylvania. I thought you might like to visit your parents' graves, perhaps see some of your childhood places." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes at the thoughtfulness of his suggestion. Though she had built a wonderful life in Walla Walla, there had always been a small piece of her heart that missed the green hills of her childhood home. "I would like that very much," she whispered. "And then," Vaughn continued, his eyes twinkling with something like mischief, "I thought we might visit the judge who married us and renew our vows, properly this time with our children present. A real wedding to celebrate what our marriage has become, not what it started as." Vivian's heart swelled with love for this man who continually found new ways to honor their unusual journey and the deep bond they had forged together. "That sounds perfect," she said, rising on tiptoes to press a kiss to his lips. "Absolutely perfect." As they walked back toward the celebration, hand in hand beneath the star-filled sky, Vivian reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. A desperate flight, a sheriff's pursuit, an uncle's peculiar will all conspiring to create a love story neither of them could have imagined. She had become his wife because of law, but he had made it real through love. And together, they had built a life richer and more beautiful than either could have dreamed possible on that fateful day, when a fugitive and a lawman's paths first crossed on the windswept plains of Wyoming.